of what I'm calling a pragmatic happy. And we'll talk about what that all means there. I just wanted to give you the overview of this. And I do want to say that, again, I want to reiterate that what's happening up here, what's happening down here, are experienced at varying levels across the participants. No narrative was, no two narratives were exactly the same. No two narratives were, to the same degree of the experiences. But these patterns were consistent across the narratives. So I want to get started with the religious identity of the pre-atheist participants. So there was a strong socialization into religion. Now, for the 10 participants that identified as atheists, all of them were born into religion. There was no wild, massive conversion here. There were a number of them that had family members that were actually in the ministry. And so, they just had religion day after day after day. It was a huge part of their lives. At this point, it was for most, it was seen as their core identity, right? So I am a religious believer. I am a person of faith. And this is something that's unchanging, and it just seemed very natural. For example, some fun quotes for you. Okay, Adam says, I wasn't really given the freedom not to believe in God. So there was no option. It was God, and that was it. Similarly, Kimberly said, I didn't know not believing God was an option. Okay? And Elizabeth, whose father was actually a pastor, said that she was raised to recite catechism from the time I was 3. It was such a big part of every day. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a 3-year-old reciting catechism? It's insane. The religious identity was also reinforced by role acceptance, right? So something that's really prevalent in evangelical Christianity is that evangelizer role, that call to go out and save people, right? And this was the role that was accepted. For example, Barclay says, I had a very close-knit group of friends that I was literally trying to get saved. Okay, and I do believe this was in early adolescence for Barclay. It's 8, 9, somewhere in there. Trying to save his school friends. Adam says, I was definitely an on-fire Christian, leading people to Jesus, working so that I had money so that I could help send my fellow friends to Bible camp over the summer. Can you imagine a 16-year-old going to work so he can send his friends to Bible camp? I don't know what you were doing with your money when you were 16 and working, but I was not sending my friends to Bible camp. What's interesting here is that so far, it seems like there's something to be said about the strength of someone's religious identity. The strength at which somebody feels that they're an evangelizer is correlated to the strength that someone feels they're a devangelizer. So when they're an apostate, if they were a strong evangelizer, like Adam, getting people saved, they were, as an apostate, now deciding to get people deconverted. Now they were becoming, the militant atheists. So there's something interesting there about that I'm still playing with in the data. So like I said, they wanted to, they started experiencing these different anomalies and crises. Okay, they began to question the moral and epistemological exemplars of theism. So things just didn't make sense. George says he's talking about the pastor of his church at this point, he would preach about the earth being 10,000 years old. Everything we knew about science, everything we know about geology and the formation of Earth completely contradicted everything I was hearing in church. Right? So these things weren't lining up. And people were starting to get confused. I don't know what to, I'm taught to believe this, but then I'm learning that. I don't know what to believe. Kimberly says, I started learning some basic psychology of why we believe certain things, and I found that my beliefs weren't supported by much. Right? So this kind of cracking was starting to happen. And you move into trying to fix that. They were trying to fix that. But not all participants didn't really threaten their Christian identity at this point. Adam has the best narratives of this, and he says, I had a professor who asked me the question, very innocently, or non-challenging, but just matter of fact. Do you really think if you were born in Iran that you would be a Christian today? It's a fair question. And I said, seems unlikely. And he said, what does that mean for how you see your religion compared to other religions? It was a geography class, political geography, and we were talking about the geographic layout of various religions. It is very hard to look at a map and not draw conclusions about I am a Christian because I was born here. So it kind of started me thinking about if I'm a Christian by default. Okay, in Adam's narrative, he talks about like this didn't threaten his identity. If anything, he started reading Christian apologetics, and he started reading atheist materials because he actually wanted to be able to combat this kind of stuff. So like I said, they began to question, all the questioning and the challenging led them to information seeking. So Rodney began reading science textbooks, something that he really was not allowed to do in the home. Steve started checking into other religions, specifically Islam. Kimberly began lurking on online atheist message boards. There was a huge amount of guilt there in Kimberly's narrative also for doing that. Elizabeth sought information primarily from other religious texts. And she was able to do this because she was homeschooled, and she had an online business when she was 13 years old. So she had her own credit card at 16, and so she was able to purchase all of these things online without really her parents knowing. What Elizabeth said about her process is that it involved reading other religious works, reading the Quran, the Satanic Bible, Kabbalic works, and the Bhagavad Gita. Then I started reading the Gnostic Gospels. You can't really read church history and not see how political and manipulated it was. Okay, so they started learning that, wait a second, this just doesn't seem to hold up. This doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, and they were just starting to experience that cognitive dissonance there. But that was like really kind of in the background at this point. So like I said, there were some of the social experiences as well. This was in the background, but it was still there, and I do think it's worth noting. Their identities began to shift, and they began to reject various parts of dogma. And the social kind of really plays into that as well because of all the hypocrisy. So Adam went from being an on-fire Christian evangelizer to a Christian liberal. So this is kind of an identity where he stayed in for quite some time. Adam, Kimberly, Barclay, and George all explicitly expressed this kind of incompatibility with the idea of a just God and then eternal punishment. So how can there be an all-loving, God that's just and he cares about you, but then he's going to send you to hell? That just didn't seem to work. And then Joe rejected various parts of dogma, and he just didn't buy into the whole speaking in tongues bit. Speaking in tongues or being slain in the spirit was all just fake to me, is what he said. So now we'll talk about the social experience. I was jumping ahead there for a minute. So the social experience, like I said, they were present, they were in the background, but it's still worth noting. For Elizabeth, because her father was a pastor, it was very common for her to kind of hear how her parents would talk openly about what was going on. She says, my parents spoke very openly about things they would criticize. I definitely grew up seeing hypocrisy. It wasn't really hidden from me. I definitely started picking up on those themes at an early age. So it's kind of also interwoven into the experience, this hypocrisy, this kind of judgment. Kimberly was talking about somebody in youth group that had put on this fake face, that would say she loved Jesus and that she'd save people and everything like that, but then when nobody was looking, would show her true colors. She said about this girl, she always talked about being nice to people, but then I would see hypocrisy. I would see her completely shunning people down. And then Joe also